Rahu and Ketu have a lot of important significations and activities in respect to relationships and relationship compatibility. First, what we're going to talk about is certain places where Rahu and Ketu may be that are definitely going to cause relationships to be a more difficult thing in a person's life. So Rahu or Ketu in these positions are going to make a person's relationship life more difficult. It'll give them a lesser capacity to have a real easy, naturally easy relationship. And so they'll have to do work on themselves. And it's real simple. The ancient books have yogas that say, if Rahu and Ketu are on angles, happiness in marriage life is not indicated. So we don't want Rahu and Ketu in the 1st, 7th, 4th, or 10th. Any of those places. In fact, I got more Rahus and Ketus here. We don't want them in any of those places. The minute we do, we're going to have some trouble in relationships. And in fact, we don't want those to be in angles from a woman's moon, either in a woman's chart, or from a man's sun. So you don't want Rahu conjunct, or in the 4th, 7th, or 10th from a man's sun. And you don't want Rahu in the conjunct the woman's moon, or in the 4th, 7th, or 10th from a woman's moon. So what I'm saying, which is applying, I'm showing from the ascendant, and I'll be talking about from the ascendant, also applies to a woman's moon and a man's sun. Okay? In fact, you could almost say it applies more to a woman's moon and more to a man's sun than it does from the ascendant. Okay? And what we see from the ascendant is going to apply to, of course, men and women, but in different ways. So Rahu or Ketu in angles from these places is not going to make it ideal for the person to have a great relationship. Whenever you see Rahu and Ketu in angles from the ascendant, it's almost like the person in this lifetime is learning to live with their gender. So if they're a man, they're learning how to be a male, masculine force in a relationship. And if they're female, they're learning to be a feminine, receptive force in the relationship. And of course, while they're learning that, they're doing everything backwards. So men tend, with Rahu or Ketu in an angle, tend to be a little too feminine in their relationships in a way that makes relationships not work well. And women tend to be overly masculine in most cases. Okay, there's some small exceptions to that rule though. So starting with Ketu in the 1st house. Okay, we're going to start with the 1st house. Ketu in the 1st house, well, Ketu is one of the neutered planets. So in the 1st house, it makes the man less masculine. It neuters his masculinity. And in a woman's chart, it makes her less feminine. It neuters her femininity. So when that happens, and the person tries to have a relationship, a woman will usually approach it more as a masculine, active person, and the man will tend to approach relationships in a little more receptive, centered way. And that'll cause problems because in a relationship, as if you learn from the full relationship class that I talked about, that I have on audio tape, in a relationship, a man has to have the courage to say what he wants, hear no, and then give another option to the woman. And a woman has to have the courage to say no to things that don't feel good. Okay? When Ketu's in the 1st house in a man's chart, he has a lot of self-doubt, so he doesn't know how to ask a woman things. He doesn't feel confident in asking or initiating the relationship forward. And that ends up making the woman feel frustrated and neglected. Unless, of course, she's a more masculine woman, in which case she'll dive right in and try to make the relationship work. But that really doesn't work because the man is still a man. It's just Ketu has neutered the way he behaves. Okay? Now, in a woman's chart, Ketu neuters her femininity, so she doesn't feel real confident in her feminine ability, or she's always had a life where she's always had to do. So she's just going to be a little more programmed to be more active-centered, doing-centered, and so in relationships, she's going to try harder to make relationships work, or to make the relationship work and go forward. The problem with that is the man will over time feel nagged, and the woman will feel neglected even if the man does what she wants him to do, because feminine energy feels loved when it's acted upon. Okay, feminine energy feels loved when the man initiates, plans, and makes decisions to have the woman in his life. And if Ketu in the 1st house makes the woman do more of those things, she's just not going to feel that loved. And in either case, so basically Ketu in the 1st in a woman's chart is a woman who needs to learn to develop confidence as in a woman's body, because the first house is her body. It's a feminine body this lifetime. And in a man's chart, it's about the man being confident as a man and having doubts in that regard. Now, Rahu, on the other hand, in the first house is a little bit different. In a woman's chart, Rahu is not as troublesome. Why? Because Rahu is a feminine planet at least. So women with Rahu in the first house will tend to be quite feminine in general. But there'll usually be something about their femininity or about them as a person that's a little awkward or insecure or doubtful. So you can have a feminine person who's not very confident, for instance, because Rahu in the first house is a person has to find out who they are this lifetime. And so that can be hard for the girl. But she'll still tend to be feminine, and her trouble in her relationships will come from not really knowing where she wants to go in life, and because of that, not really knowing what man to let into her life, and of course, not really having a strong sense of self, which doesn't come until later with Rahu in the first house. It's easy for the woman with Rahu in the first house to give up too much of herself in the relationship, and over time find that she's really not being who she wants to be. So Rahu in the first, in a woman's chart, she does have to learn who she really is before she can have a great relationship, but she'll usually have pretty smooth, harmonious relationships because Rahu at least makes her very feminine-centered. Okay? Now in a man's chart, Rahu tends to cause more trouble because Rahu is a feminine planet. So it'll make the man much more feminine in his actions. He may not be initiated enough. He may not be focused enough with what he wants in life, and that's usually the case. A man really can't make a decision to have a relationship in his life in a lasting way until he knows what he wants in life. And he can't know what he wants in life until he's focused on his path in life. Okay? And Rahu in the first, of course, makes his path confused. So then he's not going to really know what he wants, and then he's not going to really know what he wants in a relationship. So he won't be able to act upon a relationship with a lot of focus and determination, really knowing what he wants to do. So there can be some wishy-washy behavior. A guy who just takes what he gets but really doesn't make any plans for the future with the woman. Those types of things. And it also can just make the man just more feminine. I've seen cases with Rahu in the first house where it doesn't cause homosexuality, but it is a contributing factor to homosexuality. Okay, when you got other indications there. So, Rahu in the first is definitely hard for the man, and until he learns where he's going in life, he'll tend to make somewhat of a mess of his relationships. And of course, Rahu in the first sometimes can make a person, whether male or female, unless they have some really good seventh house things, have a lifetime of isolation where more of their life is as an individual, because they are working this lifetime on becoming themselves as an individual. Okay? Now, of course, when we've got Rahu in the seventh house, Rahu is our chaos, our craziness, where things are unstable and sketchy. So whether you're a man or woman, if you've got Rahu in the seventh house, you tend to going to find your relationships unstable. Okay? And oftentimes your partner will tend to be very changeable, very fickleable, undependable, or someone who has to go somewhere a lot. So there's some element of instability and unknown with your partners anytime you have Rahu in the seventh. And the Ketu in the first person needs to learn to be themselves comfortably and be secure with who they know they are in a relationship. And when they have that security, when they live that security in a relationship as well as they live it on their own, then Rahu starts toning down and their partner starts being grounded and more secure as well. And sometimes Ketu in the first house tends to try to be over-controlling with respect to who they are. They only show what they want. They, they maintain their own integrity really tightly to a fault almost. And the more they do that, the more their partner will tend to act out and do crazy things. The more cool and reserved the Ketu in the first house is, the more crazy the partner will be. If the partner is being crazy and the Ketu person blows a gasket and gets angry or gets real moody, that will usually cause the partner to settle down. Okay, but as long as the Ketu in the first house person is, that typical Ketu, doesn't show anything, doesn't show what it's feeling, doesn't show what it really wants, keeps its cards close to the vest, that'll drive their partner crazy. And so you'll see that Rahu come alive in their partner. So the Ketu in the first house has to learn how to be a crazy person if that's how they feel, and then they'll have a more balanced partnership. Rahu in the 7th house tends to indicate more than one marriage, okay, in general. At the very least, more than one very deep love that they have for somebody, with longings and attachments as residues usually. So not an ideal placement for Rahu to be in. And it usually just takes them a long time to really know how to have relationships when Rahu's in the 7th house in a win-win way where they're really getting what they want and their partner's also really getting what they want. Okay, now we can have Rahu in the 4th, Ketu in the 10th. Things are a little different here now. When Rahu's in the 4th and Ketu is in the 10th, the important thing in a woman's chart is the Rahu in the 4th. In a man's chart, the important thing is Ketu in the 10th. Because it's the 10th from the ascendant that's important in a man's chart for showing his ability to have a good relationship. And it's the 4th from the ascendant in a woman's chart that's important for her to have a good relationship. Okay? So with women's chart first, Rahu in the 4th shows a woman who's learning to feel what she really feels and to act upon her first and true feeling. And that's an important thing for a woman to do, to know what feels good and know what feels bad. But when Rahu's in the 4th, a woman so often will deny herself what feels good, accept what feels bad, or convince herself what feels bad is right, or simply, to put it real simply, just not be honest with her feelings. And by that I mean listening to her first feeling. And instead of listening to the first feeling and showing us the second feeling. Now the first feeling is always, in a negative situation, is always going to be a feeling of loss, fear, abandonment, or feeling unloved. But instead of showing that, Rahu in the 4th house will tend to show either anger or detachment, the second feeling, okay? And showing that second feeling shuts the man out. But if a woman with Rahu in the 4th learns to show those first feelings, then it gives the man the opportunity to correct what's really bothering her. And if he loves her and he's a good guy, he'll correct him and the relationship will progress. If he's an idiot, he won't correct him, at which point she should leave. But as long as she's only showing the second emotions, which are those angry and detached and indifferent emotions, then it never gives the man the signals of what he really needs to do. So he starts arguing with her or being detached and distant himself, and the relationship has a big downside. So Rahu in the 4th is really, really, really tough in a woman's chart for a relationship. Okay? You'll find, so often you'll see really good stuff for relationships, and then Rahu's in the 4th, and still every relationship the woman's in for a long, long time ends up going downhill somehow. Okay? So Rahu in the 4th in a woman's chart really needs to get anchored, needs to learn how to be secure in their feelings and emotions, so that they know they're somewhere because it feels right for them to be there. And that's just so hard to figure out with Rahu in the 4th house. Now in a man's chart, that'll put Ketu in the 10th house. So this shows a man who's starting to doubt his abilities in the world. And usually that's the result of things in the world oftentimes not working to his level of expectation, or just having a sense of discontentment about those things giving him any happiness. And if a man's feeling doubts about what he's doing in the world, his karmas, his actions, it makes him feel doubts about what to do with the woman in his life too. And that'll become really, really frustrating to the woman, who we usually have a better idea of what she wants, and he won't really know, so he won't be offering it and providing it. So it has the result of making his actions more neutralized, to where he will wait for clues and signals from the woman to act. And that's not what's going to make the woman happy, because ultimately the woman wants a man who knows what he wants, knows what he's going to do in life, and what part of what he's going to do is be with her. And a man who has that can make a woman happy. But the Ketu in the 10th house doesn't know what he's going to really do in life, feels at a loss or a discontentment with what he's going to do in his life. So he's going to have a loss of what he's going to do with the woman in his life, and a sense of discontentment with the woman in his life too. all of which will make the woman feel really unloved and unappreciated. So not a good thing when Ketu is in the 10th house in a man's chart. Now let's flip them. We get Rahu in the 4th and Ketu in the 10th. And now at this point, Rahu in the 10th and Ketu in the 4th. In a woman's chart, it's Ketu in the 4th we need to pay attention to, okay? In a man's chart, it's the Rahu in the 10th we have to pay attention to. So in the woman's chart, Ketu in the 4th is going to show a woman who is really in control of her feelings. Because that's what Ketu does. He's the fort, right? Where everything's tightly run, tightly knit, well disciplined. This shows a lot of discipline in one's feelings and emotions. And a paradigm that says, as long as I'm in control emotionally, everything will be okay. And the only things I'm going to show emotionally are this, this, and that. Okay? And I won't show these emotional things because these emotional things are bad or unpleasant or wrong to show. That's how Ketu in the 4th operates. The result is, what the woman's really feeling, a large portion of the time, is hidden. Because that's what Ketu likes to do. He likes to hide. And a woman, to have a good relationship, has to be willing and able to show her first feelings about whatever she feels. Ketu in the 4th house will hide those first feelings, and instead there'll be a tendency to only show what they think is an appropriate feeling, and that includes explaining what they think about things a lot. Because Ketu, of course, because when we only want to show certain feelings, one way we do that is by saying how we think things are as an excuse to really not show our real feelings. But when we show our real feelings, voice is not an important thing. We can tell how somebody feels. If we're driving 200 miles down the freeway, all the guy has to do is look at the girl and see if she feels happy at that speed or unhappy at that speed, right? Just look at her expression. Is she scared to death, or has she got a gleam in her eye and smiling? Depends on if she's a speed freak or not, right? So, and in everything we do, if a man asks a woman to marry him, she doesn't have to say yes or no. He can tell by her expression. Is she freaking out and want to run out of there? Or does she just light up and get really happy? And Ketu in the 4th house has such a hard time to show those first feelings, whatever they are. So instead it'll start talking to explain what it thinks it should be feeling. And basically ends up being dishonest, and it's really not showing the true feelings to the man that's with them. And when a woman doesn't show her true feelings to the man, he can't decide how to take care of her in a way that will really make her happy. The woman has to signal the man by showing her first feelings. It's the most important thing for a woman to do in a relationship. Ketu in the 4th, in fact, can be so closed with his feelings that the man senses that she's unhappy and tries to talk to her about it. She won't want to talk about it. She'll even say, sometimes she'll say, I don't want to talk about it. He'll say, maybe we should go to counseling. I don't want to go to counseling. Or she'll just be silent. But she doesn't give him any clues about what he can do to make her happier. So Ketu in the 4th can become really frustrating to a man if he really wants to make the woman happy, because she just won't let him go to that emotional place. Okay? So it can be difficult. Now the difference between Ketu in the 4th and Rahu in the 4th in a woman's chart is that the Rahu in the 4th woman will directly make life difficult for the man. She'll get angry at him, she'll yell at him, she'll blame him, she'll criticize him. Whenever she feels unloved or unappreciated or lonely, she'll usually attack him. She'll vent her second emotions, which are always unpleasant emotions, on him. And he'll be going, gosh, this woman's really crazy. She's just totally launching into me. So she'll directly sort of hurt the guy. Okay? Now, that just means he has to really be tough and understand that when she's saying those things, she's just saying, I'm feeling really unloved and unappreciated. Then all he needs to do is ignore everything she said and just do something to make her feel loved and appreciated, and then the relationship will just be fine again. But Ketu in the 4th house won't do that. Ketu will be silent, it might become distant, it'll shut down emotionally, but it doesn't give anything to the man for him to work with. And so it actually, in a way, can become more frustrating for the man because the Ketu in the 4th house woman just leaves him with nothing to work with usually. Whereas the Rahu in the 4th house woman will give him so much to work with that he's completely overwhelmed. But if he has the wisdom to understand what she really needs, he can work with that. Okay, it's a rare man who has that wisdom. Whereas the Ketu in the fourth house woman, you know, the man just has to be patient and basically give her eons of time to come around usually. Ketu in the fourth likes to work out its emotional things more independently. So it's like Rahu is more painful to a man. Ketu in the fourth can be more frustrating to a man. But they're both troublesome, difficult planets to have in the fourth house in a woman's chart. Okay? Now where were we? Okay. Rahu in the 10th in a man's chart. When Rahu is in the 10th in a man's chart, the man won't really be clear about where he's going in his life. He's still learning about what actions he's going to make in life. But he'll usually have a lot of energy and focus to do something. So he'll usually have plenty of energy and drive. And sometimes his energy and drive will be directed towards the woman. But you really never know how long it's going to stay, if it's going to be reliable. Because as his life changes and what he do changes, what he decides to do with the woman he's with can change too. So this could be the kind of guy who says, oh, I want to marry you, I know we're meant to be together forever. Finally the woman says, oh, I love you, let's get married. 4 years later he decides to come out of the man with Rahu in the 10th house. His life circumstances can in fact just get in the way of relationships. Okay? So he usually have a lot of focus about what he wants to do, but that focus won't necessarily really be his true focus. So women have to be really patient when men have Rahu in the 10th. That he's really coming from from a true place, and not just a place he envisions as being where he's going. So women always need to make sure that Rahu in the 10th house men are really sincere about where they're going, and that includes where they're going with her. Otherwise, these men can be a huge, huge disappointment to the girl, and really set her up for a huge disappointment. Okay? So that can be very difficult. Now, in a man's chart, Ketu in the 10th will usually be more frustrating to the woman in general. She'll feel frustrated that he's not coming along, he's not doing enough, he's not focused enough in his life, he's too emotional and not going and doing what he needs to do to make his life better. And that can be really frustrating for the girl. She may feel like she ends up mothering him more than she wants to, things like that. But Rahu in the 10th in a man's chart can be much more painful to a woman, because he might promise her things and then not deliver. He may lie to her without realizing it. He may decide he loves her only to decide he loves somebody else, or doesn't love her in truth down the road. So Rahu in the 10th can be so much more painful to a woman, just like Rahu in the 4th can make the woman so much more painful to the man. But Ketu can just make it so much more frustrating. And by frustrating, I mean you really, really want that man with Ketu in the 10th to really go do something and be happy, but nothing the woman does helps make him happy. Or you could be a man who has woman in the Ketu in the 4th, and you really want to love her and cherish her and make her happy, but nothing you can do really seems to do that, so it just gets so frustrating. But Rahu in the 4th in a woman's chart is a woman who's just acting out and kicking her man's butt a lot and making life really hard on him, so he has to be really strong and know how to put her in her place and to handle her and throw over his shoulder and make her do what she needs to do when she's overly emotional. But Rahu in the 10th can just make a man do things that really just tear the heart out of a woman. So Rahu in the 4th or 10th will make their partner suffer more directly, but Ketu can just make the partner suffer so much. And at first you just think, gosh, it's Rahu, that's the most one to avoid, that's the worst one, because it seems the worst. But I've just found that Ketu is really just as bad, just as painful, because the pain's usually not right there in front of you. Over a long-term period, the Ketu pain can just be so frustrating and disheartening, okay? Because there's just nothing to work with. In either case, you just don't want Rahu or Ketu in an angle, and if you're going to have an easy time in relationships. If you do, relationships are going to be more difficult. No questions asked, okay? I'd almost say relationships can be easier when Rahu and Ketu are on the 1st and 7th than if they're in the 4th and 10th. Okay? Somehow. You know, it just seems 4th and 10th tends to make the life harder, make our relationships harder somehow. Even in the 1st or 7th. In the 1st or 7th, there could be lots of confusion, there could be, you know, several relationships and so on. But it just doesn't seem to be as difficult as Rahu in the 4th or 10th. And I think maybe that's because Rahu in the 4th or 10th just uproots so much areas of our life and makes our whole life hard somehow. Okay? Alright, so pay attention to those positions if you see them there. If Rahu or Ketu is, you know, aspected and joined by helpful planets, as we talked about in our course, good house lords, planets in good dignity, then Rahu and Ketu, of course, is going to be so much less damaging, and the person will learn so much better and learn to work with Rahu and Ketu. But if you get a really bad Rahu and Ketu in an angle where it's hammered by planets in bad dignity, it's hammered by bad house lords,